Betsy Faria, December 27, 2011. Pam Hupp drove her friend Betsy home after chemotherapy in Troy, Missouri. 42-year-old Betsy was fighting cancer, leaning on her inner circle for help during the struggle. That night would be the final time anyone saw Betsy alive. Hours later, her husband Russ Faria returned from game night to find her body, stabbed over 50 times. The room was a bloodbath. A knife was sitting near her body in a brutal display. Russ dialed 911, but Betsy was already gone. Police found a grieving husband, but investigators quickly locked onto a theory that would change everything. A massive life insurance policy worth a fortune. Authorities in Lincoln County arrested Russ, charging him with the murder of his wife. The state's case focused on money and greed, but Russ had a solid alibi. He claimed he spent the entire night at a friend's house playing games. 4 witnesses backed his story, placing him miles away during the estimated time of death. How could a jury convict him with so many people vouching for him? The prosecution argued Russ had somehow coached his friends to lie, or that the timeline could be twisted to prove his guilt anyway. Despite the evidence, the 2013 trial ended in a conviction. Russ was sentenced to life. His lawyers appealed immediately, arguing that cops had ignored every other lead. What were they missing? The defense highlighted inconsistent witness statements and forensics that simply didn't fit the state's narrative. Blood spatter patterns, and the final position of the body hinted at a much different crime scene. Just days before she died, Betsy changed her life insurance beneficiary from her husband to Pam Hupp. Pam walked away with $150,000. This suspicious timing went largely ignored at first. Phone records later proved Pam was the last person to see Betsy alive. Still, her testimony was key in putting Russ behind bars. The policy change happened while Betsy was weak from chemo and potentially easy to influence. Detectives later wondered if Pam had masterminded the switch as part of a plot. Russ Faria's conviction was tossed in 2015, and he was eventually found not guilty. Judge Stephen ruled that the evidence pointed directly at Pam Hupp as the actual killer in the case. Looking into Pam's past revealed a dark history. In 2016, she killed Louis Gumpenberger in her home, claiming he was a dangerous intruder. Evidence showed she lured him there with cash to fake a home invasion. She pleaded guilty to avoid execution and got life in prison. In July 2021, Pam Hupp was finally charged with Betsy's murder. It took 10 years. Prosecutor Mike Wood called the case a masterpiece of depravity and evil. He explained how Pam manipulated the system to frame Russ while pocketing the insurance payout. After many delays, the trial for the murder of Betsy Faria is set for mid-2025. However, as of early 2026, we are still waiting for a final verdict in this saga. She is still locked up for the Gumpenberger murder. This case proved how tunnel vision can lead to wrongful convictions while the real killer walks free. Betsy's family waited a decade for justice. They wanted the person responsible held accountable while one woman played the system for pure profit. The next investigation involves a mother and daughter duo, Mark and Staudte. In April 2012, 61-year-old Mark died at home after a sudden, severe illness. His wife Diane and daughter Rachel were his caregivers during those final days. Doctors thought it was natural causes, so the family moved forward with his funeral. But Mark's death was just the start of a pattern that would eventually shock investigators. In September 2012, 26-year-old Sean Staudte died the same way. The kid was perfectly healthy until he suddenly collapsed with symptoms that baffled his entire family. At first, doctors saw no red flags. 2 deaths in one family within months? It just looked like tragic luck. But was it something darker? In June 2013, 24-year-old Sarah Staudte fell deathly ill. Her symptoms were a terrifying match to those her father and brother had before they died. Unlike them, Sarah lived, but she suffered lasting brain damage. This strange pattern of sickness finally forced the police to step in. A secret tip led investigators to take a much closer look at those recent family deaths. When they exhumed the bodies for toxicology tests, they found both men had lethal levels of ethylene glycol in their blood. Ethylene glycol is the main ingredient found in common antifreeze. Someone was methodically poisoning members of the Stout family. The chemical tastes sweet and hides easily in sugary drinks, making it a truly terrifying, invisible poison. Since antifreeze attacks the kidneys and nervous system, it makes victims look drunk before their organs simply shut down. The coroner missed it at first, because standard drug screens don't usually look for antifreeze unless they are told to. Dianista, the mother, and her daughter Rachel were busted and charged for the cruel poisonings. In the interrogation room, both women admitted to spiking the family's drinks with antifreeze to kill them off. The motive was shockingly cold. They simply saw their own flesh and blood as burdens that needed to go. Diane hated caring for Sean and found Mark's presence completely intolerable. Sarah apparently did something to become a target too. Diane later said of her husband, "I hated his guts," showing years of deep-seated rage. She and Rachel even sat down to decide which family members were too annoying to keep around. Killing them was just easier than living together. Sean had disabilities, and they just hated providing the care he needed. Sarah had somehow ended up on their list of people who just had to go. Detectives found a diary where Diane wrote down her dark thoughts about her family. The entries proved this was cold, hard calculation, not some sudden crime of passion. They researched how antifreeze kills, knowing it looks like a natural illness if you do it right. Her journal showed they had planned this for ages, picking targets and deciding who would die first. This proof was vital in showing their actions were cold and planned, not just impulsive choices. Both women pleaded guilty to skip the trial. Diane Staudte got life in prison without parole for the 2 murders she committed. Rachel got life too, but with a chance of parole, as many believe her mother forced her into it. Their age gap and family ties left many wondering, was Rachel guilty or just manipulated by her mother? Sarah survived the poisoning, but suffered lasting brain damage and lost her sight forever. At her mother's sentencing, she gave a powerful statement about her pain and her long road to recovery. She lost her family, and then learned her own mother and sister tried to kill her too. The betrayal was as painful as her physical injuries. The Staudte case shows how family poisonings hide in plain sight until a deadly pattern finally comes to light. We go from calculated family poisonings to a case fueled by something even more twisted. Elizabeth Olten. On October 21st, 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten left home in St. Martin's, Missouri, to play at a neighbor's house. The little girl loved being outside and playing with friends in her tight-knit town. When she didn't come home that night, her panicked family immediately called the police. A search started right away, with everyone combing the area. The truth they found would soon shatter the entire community. Elizabeth was found the next day in the woods. She had been attacked and hidden away in a shallow grave. The fact it happened so close to home to such a young victim left the town paralyzed with fear. Who would target a young girl in what seemed like such a safe neighborhood? 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, a nearby neighbor, quickly became a person of interest. Investigators questioned her and found a diary filled with entries that would break the entire case. Those pages exposed a twisted mindset that nobody suspected was hiding behind the teenager's face. Inside her journal, Alyssa wrote about a dark desire to know what taking a life felt like. After Elizabeth died, she logged the experience, calling the act amazing and pretty enjoyable. She used intentional misspellings that showed a casual, almost happy attitude toward the horrific act. This diary was proof of cold premeditation. But what pushes a young teen towards such a brutal act? A deep dive into her past showed a history of family chaos and mental health struggles. She had been through therapy and was taking various medications for depression and other issues. But nothing in her files hinted she was capable of the homicidal violence that eventually surfaced. The murder raised scary questions about spotting red flags in teenagers. Her doctors had already noted severe mood swings and self-harm. Yet the jump from internal pain to killing another person caught even the experts off guard. Forensic evidence revealed Bustamante strangled Elizabeth with her bare hands, then stabbed her, and finally slit her throat. She eventually confessed to detectives that she dug the grave 2 weeks before she even committed the crime. That pre-dug grave proved this was a cold, planned attack. She lured Elizabeth into the woods by promising to show her something, making the murder seem purely cold-blooded. The shallow burial site was dug well before Elizabeth died, proving Alyssa had planned the entire murder rather than acting on a whim. Alyssa Bustamante was charged as an adult, pleading guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. Her sentence was life in prison with a chance for parole, plus another 30 years on top. This judgment balanced her young age with the pure cruelty of what she had done to Elizabeth. The judge had to weigh juvenile legal standards against the sheer, calculated horror of the killing. Lawyers argued whether a teen so young could ever be reformed after such a planned, violent crime. In early 2024, Alyssa Bustamante was denied parole for the first time. Missouri officials ruled she must stay behind bars until she is eligible for a new hearing in 2027. The board found she hadn't shown enough rehabilitation or any real remorse for her crime. This murder sparked debates on how the juvenile justice system should handle young killers with traits linked to adult psychopathy. Some pointed to her developing teenage brain as a reason for mercy, while others saw the calculated murder as proof of danger. Elizabeth Olten's family said no prison sentence could ever truly fix their loss. They remembered her as a bright, happy girl who deserved to grow up and see the world. Losing her so young, just to satisfy a killer's curiosity, made this tragedy impossible for them to process. While that crime was driven by a teen's dark interest, this next story shows how a marriage built on lies can turn deadly. On June 8, 2017, Ben Renick called emergency services. She reported finding her husband Ben dead at their snake breeding facility near New Florence, Missouri. Ben Renick, at 29, he was a famous python breeder with a great reputation. Lindley found him shot near the snake cages. Police first thought a thief had broken into the shop and killed him during a robbery. However, investigators found no evidence of a break-in or any stolen property. Ben was shot 8 times, which made detectives think this was a personal attack, not a robbery. Shooting someone 8 times points to pure rage rather than a thief just trying to escape. Investigators shifted their focus, looking much closer at Ben's private life and his marriage. The detective soon discovered that Ben and Lindley's marriage was deeply troubled. Money issues from the business and personal fights had created a massive amount of tension. Lindley had also been having an affair with a man who would later become the key to solving this mystery. Things changed when Lindley's boyfriend finally cracked, telling the police he'd helped her pull off the hit. He detailed how Lindley planned Ben's death to seize control of the valuable snake breeding business and pocket his life insurance. The lover went along at first, but later decided to cooperate with investigators. His story included insider facts only a killer would know, detailing the exact timeline and where they got the weapons. Cell phone records backed up the accomplice's story, proving Lindley and her lover were in constant contact around the time Ben died. GPS data put them in the same spot despite their alibis. The cell tower pings completely shredded the fake stories they'd told. Their text messages about Ben and the breeding farm looked much more sinister once the truth came out. In December 2021, Ben Renick was found guilty of second-degree murder and armed criminal action. The jury suggested a shorter term after the defense claimed her partner, Michael Humphrey, was the real mastermind behind it. Ultimately, Lindley was convicted and sentenced to 16 years in state prison. Ben's family felt the punishment was too light, considering how cold and calculated the murder really was. Sam Renick, Ben's brother, lamented that those kids deserved a father, mourning the parents stolen away by Lindley's greed. This sentence meant she'd walk free one day, possibly while Ben's children were still just young adults. The case proved that even successful couples can hide dangerous secrets. Ben had built a massive reptile empire and seemed to have the perfect family life. Behind that mask, his wife was plotting his murder with a secret lover. The very python breeding farm Ben worked so hard for became the place where he took his last breath. He was a legend in the snake community, and news of his death sent shockwaves through reptile enthusiasts everywhere. The pythons he raised with such care were the only witnesses to the ultimate betrayal by his own wife. From one secret affair to a man juggling 2 entire lives. Molly Watson. On April 27, 2018, just 3 days before her wedding, 35-year-old Molly Watson was found dead near Monroe City. She had been shot dead. The murder crushed her family, who had just been celebrating her upcoming marriage and new beginning. But the truth revealed a fiancé with a massive secret and a dark motive. How does someone plan a wedding while plotting a murder? Molly's fiancé, James Addie, acted like he was ready for a lifetime of commitment. They had sent invitations and finalized all the arrangements for their big day. Molly thought she was starting a beautiful new chapter with the man she loved and trusted completely. What she didn't know was that James Addie was already married and living a total double life. The case moved fast once detectives found out about James's secrets. How did he keep two families apart for so long? James had kept his world strictly divided, making sure his wife and his fiancée never crossed paths or suspected a thing. But as the wedding date loomed, he realized he couldn't keep the charade going much longer. He was stuck with a choice. Come clean, or find a permanent, deadly way out of the mess he'd created before both women found out. Witnesses placed James right near the rural road where Molly's body was discovered on the day she died. His alibi crumbled under questioning. The remote location suggested someone familiar with the area who wanted to ensure the body stayed hidden for a while. Forensics showed that Molly had been shot in the head. It was an execution, not a struggle that got out of hand. That single shot meant James likely attacked her from behind when she felt completely safe and sound. Molly's father, Tim Watson, later said James gave off bad vibes. He'd felt a deep unease, but couldn't quite name it before the horrible truth came out. It is a common feeling when loved ones sense a partner is hiding something dark, but they just lack the proof needed to actually walk away. James Addie was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution argued he chose to eliminate Molly rather than let his double life be exposed. Coming clean would have been far too embarrassing and expensive for him. Still, taking Molly's life was a brutal, permanent way to keep those dark secrets buried. Witnesses at the trial detailed the extreme lengths James went to lead separate lives. He juggled different circles, tracked his schedule religiously, and clearly believed he could keep the charade going forever. But the upcoming wedding was a ticking time bomb that would blow his lies apart. The jury found James Addie guilty, sentencing him to life without parole plus another 10 years. That sentence guaranteed he would never walk free. In 2023, a Missouri appeals court upheld his conviction, dismissing claims that his double-life evidence had unfairly biased the jury. Molly Watson's family was crushed, mourning a daughter while reeling from the discovery that her fiancé had lived a total lie. A day meant for celebration turned into a funeral, with loved ones gathering to say a final goodbye. While James killed to hide a second marriage, this next case follows a man desperate to stop a divorce. Mengqi. On October 8, 2019, Joseph Elledge reported his wife, 28-year-old Mengqi, missing from their home. Mengqi, an immigrant from China, hadn't been seen since the previous night. Joseph claimed she just vanished, abandoning her toddler and leaving no trace. Detectives were immediately skeptical. Why would a loving mother just walk away from her young child? They soon found proof of serious trouble in the marriage. The couple was fighting constantly, with the threat of divorce pushing tensions to the limit. But investigators uncovered evidence that went far beyond your average marital spat. Records showed a disturbing history of Joseph, controlling and hurting Mengqi. GPS logs from Joseph's car placed him in a remote forest on the night she went missing. There was no logical reason for him to be out there then. This digital trail became the key to mapping his movements that night. Phone records and vehicle tracking created a timeline that proved Joseph was lying about his wife's disappearance. In March 2021, hikers stumbled upon human remains in a state park. Forensic teams confirmed the remains were Mengqi Ji. The body was found exactly where Joseph's GPS had pinged the night she vanished. This grim discovery turned a missing persons search into a murder investigation. Joseph Elledge was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. At trial, the prosecution laid out the couple's toxic history and Joseph's need for absolute control. Prosecutor Dan Knight called him a jealous, controlling psychopath who simply couldn't stand the thought of his wife finally leaving him for good. Friends took the stand, describing Mengqi's final months as a desperate attempt to escape a marriage that was becoming more dangerous daily. Joseph had cut her off from everyone, a classic move used by abusers to maintain power. As she fought for freedom, the violence escalated. Witnesses recalled seeing red flags, though few realized just how much danger Mengqi was in before it was too late. Their young daughter became a heartbreaking point during trial, as evidence showed Joseph used the child to manipulate and control Mengqi. In 2021, Joseph Elledge was convicted of murder and sentenced to 28 years. By 2024, his appeals were exhausted, ensuring he will stay behind bars to serve out the majority of his long sentence. This tragic story highlights how dangerous a breakup can be when one partner refuses to let the other go. Experts often point to this case to show why safety plans are vital for anyone leaving a controlling spouse. Halfway across the world, Mengqi's family in China was left devastated. She had moved to America for a better life, only to lose it at the hands of her husband. Now, their daughter will grow up without a mother, or a father. One is gone, the other is in prison. If you appreciate deep dives into the most chilling criminal investigations, stick around for more. Hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to tap the bell icon. Some tragedies are planned, while others just explode out of pure chaos. Marcus Heisler III. On August 28, 2021, 3-year-old Marcus Heisler was playing outside his Kansas City home when shots rang out. The toddler was caught in a drive-by shooting in a neighborhood already haunted by violence. Emergency crews rushed him to the hospital, but he didn't survive his injuries. This senseless loss of a young child left the whole community in shock. Who pulled the trigger? How did a quiet residential street become a war zone? Investigating Marcus's death was a nightmare because of the messy nature of drive-bys. Witnesses gave conflicting stories about the cars and the suspects. With the area's history of revenge, finding a specific motive was difficult. Was it a targeted hit, or just a reckless act that killed an innocent boy? Eventually, detectives linked Derek Wren Jr. to the crime. DNA and witness statements put him right there. During questioning, Wren claimed it wasn't supposed to happen, suggesting the results weren't what he planned. Whether he missed his real target or never meant to hit anyone is unknown. Forensics mapped out the bullet paths and exactly where Marcus was standing when struck. Ballistics testing confirmed the specific type of firearm used in the attack. Cell phone data and surveillance footage from the area helped build a timeline. Prosecutors finally had enough to prove Wren was involved. Even if the exact reason for the shooting was never clear, phone records showed messages suggesting a deep, ongoing feud in that neighborhood. People who were scared to talk finally stepped up. Their stories matched the evidence, building a complete picture of what really happened that day. Wren faced multiple charges and eventually took a plea deal for less time. Derek Wren Jr. was sentenced to 22 years in prison in 2023. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action for the boy's death. Marcus's family was devastated and felt let down by the entire system. They felt 12 years didn't adequately reflect the permanent loss they suffered. This young boy would never experience school, friendships, or adulthood because someone chose to fire a weapon. The case. It highlighted major concerns about gun violence in urban areas and how it kills innocent people. Local activists used this tragedy to demand more community programs to stop these things before they start. They argued that fixing the underlying neighborhood issues could prevent future drive-by shootings. Other people wanted stricter laws and harsher jail time to scare off potential shooters. Wren's shorter sentence started a heated debate about plea deals when children are the victims. Some legal experts said taking a plea deal was much safer than going to trial and risking a complete acquittal. Others thought the state should have gone to trial regardless of the risks. They believed a jury would have handed down a much longer sentence after seeing the damage. Marcus Heisler became a symbol for every family living in the shadow of violence they didn't create. His death represented so many young lives cut short by situations they couldn't even understand. To this day, Kansas City still talks about the balance of public safety and justice. While that motive was a mystery, the next case reveals a cop who used his power for evil. Jesse Valencia. On June 5, 2004, the body of Jesse Valencia was found on a lawn near campus. The investigation into the 23-year-old's death exposed a secret affair with Officer Stephen Rios. Jesse had clearly fought for his life, and an autopsy showed he had been strangled. At first, it looked like a total mystery with no clear leads. The investigation exposed a secret relationship someone was willing to kill for. How was a victim linked to the very man sworn to protect the community? Jesse Valencia was secretly seeing Stephen Rios, an officer with the Columbia Police Department. Their connection began after Rios arrested Jesse on several previous occasions. This massive power dynamic meant Jesse held secrets that could destroy Rios's career and family. Rios was a married man with a newborn baby, hiding a secret affair behind a family facade. Eventually, Jesse decided he was done hiding the relationship. "I am going to out him," he told close friends before he died. That statement turned him into a threat to Rios's entire world. If the truth came out, he would lose his job, his marriage, and his standing. How far would a man go to keep that secret buried? At first, the murder investigation stalled because no one knew the victim and the killer were linked. Forensic science changed everything. DNA found under Jesse's fingernails pointed directly to Stephen Rios. Plus, arm hairs found on Jesse's chest were a perfect match for Rios. The coroner found that Jesse was strangled, with bruises matching a tactical chokehold. The specific injuries suggested a killer with professional restraint training, which fit Rios's background in law enforcement perfectly. Detectives saw signs of a violent struggle. Overturned furniture and defensive wounds proved Jesse fought for his life until the very end. So, how did they finally link a cop to this brutal crime? A critical witness named Jennifer Schermerhorn finally spoke up about the secret affair Jesse was having. Her testimony provided the missing context that made the forensic evidence meaningful. She described the secret interactions she saw and Jesse's own words about the affair. Without her courage to speak, the killer might have walked. Stephen Rios was eventually arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Seeing a police officer arrested for murder sparked massive outrage and attention across Colombia. The trial detailed their secret relationship and the power dynamics involved. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who eliminated Jesse to stop the truth from destroying his career and home life. The defense tried their best, but the mountain of DNA and witness statements was just too much. The jury found Rios guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life without parole. However, that conviction was overturned on appeal due to technicalities, but a retrial found him guilty of second-degree murder, adding 23 years to his life sentence. This tragedy exposed the dangers of power imbalances when officers get involved with people they have arrested. It also showed the lethal risks faced by anyone threatening to expose an authority figure's secrets. Finally, it proved the horrifying lengths some will go to protect a lie. Jesse Valencia's family was left to mourn a young man who had his struggles, but deserved a full life. They were heartbroken that a man sworn to protect the community killed someone just to save himself. This case shattered the public's trust in the Colombia Police Department. It sparked a national conversation about how we hold criminal police officers accountable. After the 2008 retrial, Stephen Rios was sent away for life plus 23 years. But Rios died in prison in early 2025 at age 48. Now, we turn to a tragedy involving a much more vulnerable victim, Erica Green, known as Precious Doe. In April 2001, the decapitated body of a girl was found in the woods of Kansas City. The poor girl's head had been severed and left in a nearby bag. The sheer brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the entire community. For years, authorities couldn't identify her, calling her Precious Doe while they desperately searched for any information about her life. Who was this little girl, and how could such a brutal crime happen? The case sat cold for years, as investigators hit wall after wall trying to identify her. In 2005, a massive breakthrough finally identified her as 3-year-old Erica Green. She was originally from Oklahoma. She had been living with her mother and stepfather, Michelle and Harold Johnson, when she vanished. The identification opened doors that had been locked for years. The truth was haunting. Erica died simply for refusing to go to bed. Harold Johnson struck her with an ashtray, inflicting injuries that proved fatal. Such brutal force against a helpless child showed a total lack of human restraint or basic parenting instincts. Once Erica passed, the Johnsons used hedge clippers to dismember her and dump the remains. When Michelle Johnson saw what Harold had done, she reportedly asked him, "What did you do?" That question suggested she wasn't part of the murder, but she certainly helped with the cover-up. Dumping the body made her a criminal, though some wonder if Harold forced her to help him hide the crime. Solving Erica's case was difficult because the crime happened years before the victim was ever identified. Evidence had rotted away, and witness memories had started to blur. Finally, confessions from both Michelle and Harold Johnson filled in the dark gaps of the story. Michelle eventually flipped on Harold, testifying about the horrific events and his direct actions. Harold Johnson went to trial in 2008 and received a life sentence. Michelle Johnson pleaded guilty and got 25 years for helping cover up the murder. Their different sentences reflected who actually killed Erica versus who just helped dispose of her body afterward. This tragedy sparked outrage over the broken systems that allowed Erica to be in such a dangerous home. Were there red flags the authorities missed? Could anyone have saved her life? Advocates used Erica's story to demand better oversight and more help for children living in high-risk environments. Harold died in prison in 2014. Michelle was paroled in 2022, walking free after serving most of her 25-year sentence. Erica Green's case remains among the most haunting crimes in Kansas City history because of its sheer, senseless brutality. The years she spent as a Jane Doe only deepened the tragedy. It was as if she was erased twice, once by her killers, and again by anonymity. The eventual conviction offered some justice, but it couldn't bring back the life that was stolen. While Erica was killed by family, our next case shows how debt can push a person to destruction. Benjamin and Sarah Bonney. On December 23, 2006, Brian Dorsey arrived at his cousin's home in New Bloomfield, Missouri, looking for help. Brian was drowning in debt and struggling with addiction when he knocked on their door. The Bonnies welcomed him in, never imagining their kindness would lead to their deaths. That night would end in a double murder and Brian's own execution years later. Brian Dorsey was being hounded by people he owed money to, creating a desperate situation. He went to the Bonnies' house, hoping to escape his mounting problems. Benjamin was 28 and Sarah was 25, living with their little girl. Their stable life stood in sharp contrast to the chaos Brian was currently living. Brian Dorsey didn't use a shotgun. He used a small caliber gun to kill Benjamin and Sarah in their bed. Both died in the attack. Their young daughter was there, but luckily survived the night without physical harm. Investigators believe the motive was drug debts, mixed with a drug-induced state of paranoia and stress. Some evidence hinted at more crimes, but those details are still debated. After the shootings, Brian ran, but he eventually decided it was time to give himself up. He turned himself in and confessed to killing both of his cousins. That confession, along with physical evidence from the room, left no doubt he was the killer. The wounds proved the attacks were intentional and carried out at point-blank range. Brian Dorsey was convicted and given the death penalty. But his story took a turn when an unlikely group began fighting for his life, claiming he had truly changed on death row. He took classes, helped fellow prisoners, and seemed to feel deep, genuine guilt for what he did. More than 70 prison guards who worked with him actually signed a petition to stop his execution. His cousin, Jenny Gauser, argued that execution was wrong since Brian had been completely rehabilitated. This unusual backing from prison guards proved just how much Brian had truly changed while behind bars. Guards called him helpful and respectful a man, clearly haunted by regret. They argued his growth showed that even those who do terrible things can find redemption. This group even included officers who usually favor the death penalty, but they made an exception after watching Brian's character evolve over many years. Brian himself admitted that words couldn't carry the weight of his guilt, fully acknowledging the horror of his crimes while showing deep remorse. His story forced a hard look at redemption and whether true rehabilitation should change the fate of those facing execution. Despite those pleas for mercy, Brian Dorsey was executed on April 9, 2024. The lethal injection ended a legal saga that lasted nearly 20 years. Proponents of the death penalty argued the sheer brutality of the crime, demanded the ultimate price, 2 lives lost, and an orphaned child no matter how much he changed later. Opponents argued his turnaround proved the death penalty is unnecessary when a prisoner truly reforms their soul. The Bonney family's little girl grew up as an orphan because of Brian's actions that one violent night. No amount of regret or personal growth could ever give back what she lost. The victim's family was torn, with some open to mercy, while others felt the death sentence was justice. We move from a decades-old case to a recent horror that left the community stunned. Christina Lynn Winkler. On April 28, 2025, 35-year-old Christina Lynn Wrenchler was shot inside her St. Louis home, while 5 children watched in horror. Christina was pregnant when she was killed, meaning the shooter took 2 lives that day. The gunfire erupted right in front of witnesses who would later provide key testimony about the attack. What could possibly drive someone to commit such an act with so many people watching? Police identified the shooter as 28-year-old Veneer Jones. According to official survivor statements and witness reports, Jones lost his temper and shot Christina repeatedly, including fatal rounds to her head. Why he was so angry isn't clear yet, but the sheer violence of the assault suggests pure rage instead of a cold, calculated plan. The people who saw the shooting were just kids who will likely carry that trauma for the rest of their lives. One witness actually played dead just to survive the massacre, showing the absolute terror that gripped the house that night. The mental scars on these witnesses go far beyond the physical violence inflicted on Christina herself. Forensics found multiple gunshot wounds that headshot proves he wanted to make sure Christina didn't walk away. With so many people able to identify him, Jones can't exactly claim it was an accident or self-defense. Reports of his explosive anger and the deliberate shooting basically shredded any defense strategy his lawyers might try. Vanier Jones was soon arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Christina and 1 for her unborn child. These charges recognize the pregnancy as a separate victim under Missouri law, designed to protect unborn children. In this state, a defendant can face murder charges for a fetus regardless of if they knew about the pregnancy, as long as the fetus was developing. As of 2026, the case is still pending. Since the crime is recent, the legal process is only just beginning. Prosecutors plan to use testimony from the people who watched the shooting. It is a strong case, even though relying on traumatized children is always a challenge in court. This case highlights the extreme vulnerability of pregnant women and the double tragedy when an attack takes 2 lives at once. Christina's family is grieving for her, and for the grandchild they'll never get to hold. The young people who saw the violence will need years of counseling to process the nightmare they survived. People in St. Louis are shocked that a killer would be bold enough to strike with so many witnesses around. Such a brazen act suggests either blind rage or a terrifying lack of concern for the consequences. Either way, it paints a dark and disturbing picture of the shooter's mindset during the assault. Christina Wrenchler's story stays in the spotlight, while the community waits for justice in court. Her family held on for justice while comforting the young witnesses, traumatized by her final moments. While some crimes are solved fast, this case has stretched on for decades. Angela Lawless. On August 6, 1992, 19-year-old Angela Lawless was found dead near Route Z in Missouri. She was beaten and shot before her body was dumped in a rural area. The sheer brutality of it suggested a crime of passion, not calculation. But despite years of work, this mystery became famous for a wrongful conviction rather than finding the killer. Who was really behind Angela's death? Josh Keyser was arrested and convicted based on nothing but circumstantial evidence. He swore he was innocent through 16 long years behind bars. The prosecution relied on shaky witness accounts and sloppy police work instead of hard DNA proof. By 2009, Josh Keyser was finally exonerated and freed. His ordeal remains a dark stain on Missouri's legal history. But if Josh was innocent, who actually committed the crime? The case turned cold again, leaving detectives to sift through decades-old evidence that had gone stale. New forensic tech and a fresh set of eyes eventually led to a major breakthrough. Special investigator David James took on the case, stating it was time for Michelle to get justice. He expressed strong determination to finally solve what happened to Angela. His team pored over evidence and interviewed witnesses using modern methods on a case that had stalled for years. By early 2026, no one has been caught for Angela's murder since Josh Keyser walked free. Though DNA has pointed to new persons of interest, this remains an active and open cold case. An arrest finally happened more than 32 years after the tragedy. Specifics on the evidence against the suspect, Lamb, are being kept quiet until the trial. But the arrest implies that investigators finally have enough proof to seek a conviction. Josh Keyser's reaction to the new arrest was deeply complicated. He felt numb and even questioned how some parts of the new investigation were handled. After 16 years of wrongful imprisonment, he has very strong views on police transparency and procedure. His fight for legal reform comes straight from his own personal nightmare. Forensic options back in 1992 were extremely limited compared to today. DNA testing, cell data, and digital trails we use now simply didn't exist 30 years ago. Investigators in 2024 had high-tech tools the original detectives never had. But the ticking clock meant that key witnesses had already passed away. Memories faded, and old physical evidence had naturally degraded. Cold case investigators had to balance modern science against the reality that some evidence was either missing or ruined by the sloppy storage methods of the early 1990s. As of 2026, the case against James Lamb is moving through the courts. The trial will decide if the state can prove he killed Angela beyond any reasonable doubt. The burden of proof is huge given the case's history. Jurors must be absolutely convinced that this time, the police have the right person. Angela's family has waited over 30 years for justice. They watched an innocent man suffer in prison, while the real killer remained a free man. This new arrest brings a glimmer of hope, but it also brings back painful memories. Now they have to wait and see if this trial succeeds, where the first one failed. Angela Lawless deserved better than to be a case study for a broken justice system. The ongoing push to solve her case is an effort to honor her memory and provide the accountability she deserved from day one. That is all for today. Thanks for tuning in and watching.